had a main class. Ooh. Get used to the mic. It's been about 20 years since I've had a main class at the gathering, and I'm really excited to be here with you and to share some thoughts this week. One of the benefits of being on the committee is whenever they bring up your name to do a class, you're like, well, what about so-and-so, or what about so-and-so, so you can kind of save that for, or, if there's an emergency, then I can jump in. But I did rotate off the committee, so I think they showed me that's what happens when you rotate off the committee. But at my class at Denison, that was at Denison University, I did end the class on Saturday with a song. Now, I'm not going to sing this Saturday, but I have a request for all the choir members that are in the audience that would participate in the choir. I am going to end on a song, hopefully this week, called "The Healer is Here," which is the reason for my title. But the choir is the one I'd like to sing the song. So hopefully you can get a lot of people, especially ladies. Suzanne said we need ladies to come and help support the choir. So I promise it'll be a rewarding song. It's something that if you are worried about it being complicated, it's not hard. And we'll do it on the Saturday class at the end of my last class is the plan. So the Lord will provide. I'm going to trust in that. So as we spend time this week considering examples of healing in Scripture, I hope this will stimulate your minds and hearts to bring us all to an understanding of our desperate need for healing. Now, you may be sitting there saying, what are you talking about? I don't need healing. But I think we'll find as we go through these examples, we all need healing. But interestingly enough, we're all called to be healers as well. And we'll see how that applies in terms of the call that Jesus made to his disciples. So let's see if my clicker's working. I bought a new clicker. There we go. And remember this set of verses in Luke 7, where the men came to Jesus and they said, John the Baptist sent us to you to ask, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else? At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, evil spirits, and gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, go back and report to John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk. Those who have leprosy are cured. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And good news is preached to the poor. And it's also in Matthew 4, where it says Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. It says news about him spread all over Syria, and people were brought to him who were suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, the paralyzed, and he healed them. So see this combination, teaching, preaching, and healing. We've spent a lot of time in our lives considering Jesus' teaching and his preaching. But what about healing? Have you ever really looked at all the healing miracles that he performed? In Matthew 9, it says Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. It says when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. So here we see his motivation. They were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send workers into his harvest field. The following chapter, he sends out the 12. He says, as you go to them, preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you've received, freely give. So they were to preach that the kingdom was near. To heal the sick, raise the dead, and cleanse those with leprosy, drive out demons. And freely they received, to freely give. So going back to that review in Luke 7, These are the things that he was instructing them to, they were told to tell about what John had seen. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, leprosy is cured, the deaf hear, dead are raised, and good news is preached to the poor. And that's how we're going to structure our classes this week. But why was this important for these events to have taken place? Well, there were messianic prophecies of healing. In Isaiah 35, it says in 5 and 6, "Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. The lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy." In Isaiah 42, where it says, "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations." In 42:7, to open the eyes of the blind, free captives from prison, to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. These were expectations of the Messiah when he comes. In 42:16, "I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth." So put yourself in the people's place right now. Imagine the excitement when the people are told that a healer is arriving in their town. The word of Jesus' compassionate healing would have spread like wildfire. And he responded to the people's needs, both physically and spiritually. But it couldn't have been just about the physical healing. For physical ailments, Jesus could have just stood in line and had people pass by, and he could have tapped them on the shoulder as they walked by and just healed them in a procession. So there had to be a greater purpose that he was trying to teach. Now, the beginnings of these talks actually started with an exhortation I gave back in 2013 entitled, "Why Did Jesus Perform Miracles?" And in that exhortation, I drew a conclusion that there were 3 reasons that Jesus performed miracles. Number 1, that he cared. He demonstrated compassion. He really cared about people. But number 2 was to fulfill those messianic prophecies, to make people aware. He's here. He's ready. He's the one. And we'll see, there were people that denied that or refused to see it. But the third is, I think, even more important, to demonstrate spiritual healing by healing physical conditions. And that's the part maybe you haven't thought about or looked into, but that's what we're going to be exploring this week. Another common thread that you'll see in all of these healings, or almost all of them, is these phrases: "Your faith has healed you," or "Your faith has saved you," or "Your faith has made you well." And there's a list here of different miracles and healings that Jesus did that we're going to be looking into. But it's also important to see the one where he said he did no miracles there due to their lack of faith. So what implications does that have for us? And I think as we unleash the power of faith in our own need for healing, but it also is in the assisting of the healing of others. When we pray for others, do we truly believe that this is going to make a difference? So this is the set of questions I'd like you to ask yourselves as we go through these different examples this week. How do the physical healings, whether it's blindness, lameness, the man with the withered hand, the deaf, how does that demonstrate a spiritual aspect? Not just the physical healing, but what is the spiritual aspect of that healing? The second thing, what method does Jesus use when he heals? There's a large variety of things. Sometimes he speaks and the person's healed. Sometimes he touches them and the person's healed. Sometimes he asks them a question or asks them to do something specific. And that's interesting. We'll look into some of those different questions or things that he instructs as part of the healing process. Third is, what is the role of compassion that Jesus showed in those healings? How does that matter that Jesus wept? We're going to look at that verse. Shortest verse in the Bible. It's always my memory verse whenever I was put on the spot as a kid, you know. Jesus wept. That was the one I remember. But he felt, and we'll talk about compassion, the need for compassion. The next one is, how does our compassion assist in others in the healing process? And we'll learn about what compassion really is and how do we demonstrate it. And then what role does faith, either that person's faith or others' faith, have in the healing process? So hopefully I've whetted piqued your interest with what my overview was. So this is the classes that I expect to go through today. The background and overview we've just done. We're going to handle the blind receiving sight for the rest of the time today. How am I doing on time? Got about half hour. The lame walk, leprosy are cured, and the deaf hear, and the mute speak. I didn't have room for that on the title page, but we'll see those for tomorrow. The third day, we're going to talk about heart failure. That's a very personal one for me, having had a heart attack 12 years ago. So we'll have a little discussion about heart failure. But the spiritual aspect of heart failure, there's a lot in the Bible about hearts and the causes and cures. And then the fourth day, hardening of heart. And this is one that we really have to be careful with, and how to overcome hardening of heart. And then finally, we're going to conclude with the dead being raised to life. And that's the last one of those messages that John was asking them to communicate. So hopefully I've made your interest, and we'll move on to crediting my sources. And I realize I didn't bring my book up here. Let me go get it. Hold on. Prepared everything in advance, but I forgot these. You're going to see a number of quotes from a book by Brother Dennis Gillette called Diseases of the Soul. And hopefully I've included his name on the slide to give him the credit for this. But a lot of the spiritual aspects, I have to give credit to Brother Dennis, because they really are illuminated in this book, to use that word. There's about 18 of them that he takes, different diseases, and then compares the spiritual aspect with the physical aspect. And then there was a follow-up book called He Healeth All Thy Diseases, which he actually added more diseases to his consideration. And I'll leave it up to you, but if you have an interest in this week, these are books that I would highly recommend. It was actually Brother Mark Dravenstadt that put me onto this group of books, because he had heard that my talk about why did Jesus do miracles. And he said, you ought to look at a book by Brother Dennis Gillette, because it takes that idea of the physical and the spiritual. So he's the one I have to give credit to for putting me on this. I had known about Brother Gillette from the book that he wrote about the genius of discipleship. And that's another book. If you haven't read that one, it's one of my favorite books of all time, and I would highly recommend that. And it's not a hard read at all, but it's very moving for you. So in Brother Gillette's Diseases of the Soul, he has a thing about blindness where he says, there's no substitute for spiritual vision. Without it, the people perish. And it brought to mind to me a hymn from our Green Book where it says, the God of Abram praise. And one of the verses says, our pilgrimage we pass with Jesus in our view, and through this dreary wilderness our way pursue. So when we go about life in our pilgrimage, do we fix our eyes on Jesus? Do we keep him and the kingdom first priority? Or do we go about with blinders on? You know, Brother Guy actually gave a great exhortation. It's funny how God works. This past Sunday in Cleveland, where he asked, are you kingdom ready? And that was his topic, about seeing the time of the kingdom as now, not just some way time in the future, but thinking about it and making it real for us today. So I think that's kind of the same idea here. So let's look at Bartimaeus, when Bartimaeus is healed by Jesus. It says, they came to Jericho, and Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting on the roadside begging. When he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of God, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him, "Be quiet." But they shouted all the more. He shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." They called the blind man. "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." It says he threw his cloak aside and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Here's Jesus asking him a question. The blind man says, "Rabbi, I want to see." Jesus says, "Go, your faith has healed you." And immediately he receives his sight. So Jesus just speaking the words. He receives his sight. And it says he follows Jesus along the road. So that's interesting that Jesus asks a question. You would think it's pretty obvious, a blind man coming for help. But he wants to hear it from the man. He wants to understand what the man asks. And he calls him rabbi, meaning teacher. So he's giving them that honor. And he had called out having mercy on him. Here's another example where two men are healed. It says they went on from there and two blind men followed him. "Have mercy on us, Son of David." So again, that connection. When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him and he asked, "Do you believe I'm able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. And it says he touched their eyes. So he used touch in this case. And he said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. But Jesus warned them sternly, "See that no one knows about this." And we'll maybe explore why he was telling people not to talk about it. But they went out and spread the news about him anyway, all over the region. It's interesting, we'll see that same connection in a lot of the other healings. Here's another one where two men are healed. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him, and two blind men were sitting by the roadside. When they heard Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And again, he stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Here it says Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. And immediately they received their sight and followed him. Now this is an interesting one. It's a two-step healing. And we can talk about why there are two different steps of this. It says they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Here it says when he spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" The man says, "I see people and they look like trees walking around." So this is a unique one. And then it says once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and his eyes were open and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. So there's a little difference here. He's spitting, first of all, on the man's eyes. But the fact that he sees trees walking around, does that mean perhaps he had sight previously and then lost his sight? How else would he know what trees looked like, if he hadn't ever seen them before? But the fact that Jesus then puts his hands on the man and then his eyes are opened. And then it says he saw things clearly. Now here's another one where we see the spiritual reflecting the natural, when Jesus connects sight with understanding. Where Jesus says, be careful, he's talking to his disciples, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. And they say, it's because we have no bread. Now, I don't know about you, I always feel for the disciples, because I would probably be one of these too, where I would come up with some dumb statement to Jesus, and then he'd be like, really? Come on. No bread. He talked about, I fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves. I mean, you don't think we need any bread, So he says, why are you talking? We have no bread. Do you not see or understand? He says, are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes that fail to see, but ears that fail to hear? Don't you remember I broke 5 loaves and fed 5,000 people, and how many basketfuls you still picked up? So we see this connection of eyes but failing to see and ears but failing to hear. It's the understanding is what he's connecting there with sight. And probably my favorite verse, and Brother Mark actually used this in his talk here at the gathering last year. What is spiritual blindness? This is from Brother Dennis Gillette. He says spiritual blindness is making what is peripheral central, and what is central peripheral. Ever do that? I've had that happen. You're focusing on the wrong things. You're focusing on the details instead of keeping the most important thing the most important. I think we see this obviously with Jesus and the Pharisees. They spend a lot of time on the details instead of the most important things. And we aren't going to take a lot of time to look at these, because these are ones that you know, but the plank or speck in the eye, where in Luke 6, Jesus said, why do you look at a speck of dust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Jesus says, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you can take the speck, or help take the speck from your brother's eye. So he wasn't saying don't help your brother. What he's saying is first deal with your own problem, your own plank in your eye first. Then you can help your brother or sister. How about this one where he calls the Pharisees blind fools, blind guides, blind men, hypocrites. Jesus said, you give 1/10 of your spices, your mint, your dill, your cumin, but you neglect the more important things. Justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He calls them blind guides. He said, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. They would put cheesecloth over a cup of wine so they wouldn't get a gnat in there because they didn't want to taint the offering. But they weren't merciful and faithful. And our last one here, unclean and clean, where he says, why do your disciples break the tradition? They don't wash their hands before they eat. Jesus said, it's not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of his mouth that makes him unclean. So we've considered a number of examples of spiritual blindness, and I saved this one to finish with today. And I think you might have seen this one coming. I had a picture of this at the beginning. In John 9, it says, there was a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened that the works of God might be displayed in him. They had been mistakenly taught by the rabbis that there had to be a consequence. If this man has blindness, there was some sin that was committed either by him or by his parents that caused this to happen. That was the teaching that they had, the wrong teaching that they had. And Jesus corrects it. And it says, in continuing, it says, after saying this, he spit on the ground. So here he spits on the ground, makes some mud with his saliva, and puts it on the man's eyes. So it's a different method of healing. But he says, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. So here's an interesting command to go do something. And it's interesting, the word pool, the word Siloam means sent. So that's a connection there. But it says the man went and washed and came home seeing. So why go and wash? Is that a connection perhaps for us with baptism? The idea of washing away? Or was it reinforcing in the man's mind that he could be healed, but he had to go and do something as far as, doing that as an expression of his faith? We'll look at those things. When the Pharisees hear about this, they bring the man to him, and it says, on the day that Jesus made the mud and opened the man's eyes, it was a Sabbath. Oh, no, it was a Sabbath. They were worried about the rules. Therefore, the Pharisees asked how he received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees say, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." The others asked, "How can a sinner do miraculous signs?" And they were divided. But next they call in his parents. They still did not believe, it says, that he had been blind, so they sent for his parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it now he can see?" And the parents are being very careful because they're worried about being thrown out of the synagogue. "We know he's our son, and we know he's born blind. But as for how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself." So the second time they bring the man in. And they say, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner," meaning Jesus. And I love the man's reply. "Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see." Like all of us that know the song Amazing Grace, this is where that phrase in the song comes from. I was blind, but now I see. And obviously that is the idea of understanding. And they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And I love his response. "I told you already, but you didn't listen. Do you want to hear it again?" And this is what really sets them off. "Do you want to become his disciples too?" They really get upset about it. But the man rightly explains, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. And Jesus heard they had thrown him out. He said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man says, "Who is he, sir? Tell me that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him, and he is the one speaking with you." And the man says, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. And Jesus says, "For judgment I have come into the world, that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." And the Pharisees who heard him say this, say, "What, are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." And I think this is a great understanding, or a key principle, that sight represents understanding. The fact that they claim to see makes them responsible. Let's look at a few of Brother Gillette's thoughts on this. The Pharisees are described as examples of spiritual blindness. They would strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Peripheral things are made central, and central peripheral. "Ye blind Pharisee," the self-exhortation for them. It said vanity was like a cataract. It was blocking them from seeing. Their focus was on the external, about washing the hands, about all of those things, instead of the more important matters, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jesus said you should practice the latter, but don't neglect the former. And Brother Gillette says impurity can hinder our vision, and worldly preoccupation can lead to double vision. That's what Brother Guy talked to us about this past Sunday. That superficiality can take a frivolous approach to things, and real spiritual vision calls for our focus on the deeper things and penetrating vision. Oh, I wanted to go back to that. The verse, "Blessed are the pure in heart." Here's that heart connection. "For they shall see God." I don't know about you, that's my greatest hope for the kingdom, is someday to see the face of God. That's the thing I'm looking forward to probably the most. The first step is acknowledgement, a recognition of the disease. But many blind people insist they can see. But recall Jesus' words in John 9. If you were blind, you would have no sin. But because you say we see, your guilt remains. Brother Gillette says, a sincere man or woman realizing their spiritual blindness will become deeply aware of the value of vision. It says impediments can be removed, and recovery from double vision can be established. The healer is here. The Word of God brings light to dark places and enlarges our eye of faith. The earth is full of divine glory, and we must humble ourselves under God's mighty hand and fix our eyes on God and Zion. So thank you for your attention this morning. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm good. We'll continue tomorrow with the lame walking, the leprosy being cured, and the deaf hearing, and the mute speaking. Thank you.